Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon. Just a small correction on that very nice introduction. I was Director of Grad Studies. I've handed that off to a colleague. I'm now Director of Alumni Relations, which I love doing. Anyway, that was a very nice introduction and sort of took a little bit of my introductory line, kind of like Jane's. But when I was in college 5 decades ago, yes, I'm much older than Jane. I was studying graphic design, and I learned how to give shape to messages and information that would be printed on paper. I thought that was going to be my life, designing images, text that would be on posters and booklets and brochures and so on. A lot has changed, obviously. Today, I teach my communication design students to give shape to messages and information, but not just on paper, but on screens and in environments. New tools, new technologies, new formats, but the goal remains the same: communication. So let me start with a comparison. A comparison between messages that appear on paper and messages that appear on screens. So what I'll do is I'll show you 3 examples. By the way, this is all student work. I've been working or exploring this topic with students for close to 20 years, and so I had a lot to choose from. I'll first show you the message in words, the way you might encounter it on paper, in a newspaper, on a poster, maybe even on a website. Whoops, did I touch the screen? I did. Sorry. And then I'm going to show you a video that uses the very same words, and I want you to think about what's similar and different about them. So this is the first example. These are facts that happen in a typical day in the United States. Read a few, you'll get the picture. The facts, by the way, are 17 years old, because that's how old the video is. But that doesn't matter, because that doesn't change the message, the basic message of the video. Okay? Let's watch it. Same words, different presentations. I've shown this to many audiences over the years, and probably the one most consistent message that I've gotten back from the audience goes something like this. Wow, I realized at some point when I was watching this piece that, that beat that appeared, a baby is born or a person dies, that appeared consistently, and I realized at some point that's happening in real time. And that affected the way I read the information and responded to the messages here. I've heard other things in terms of the music. I've heard other things in terms of the way the facts were paired. But fundamentally, the one thing that this piece does, because it's a time-based presentation, is that it took advantage of real time. It took advantage of the fact that as we're watching these facts, somewhere in the United States, a baby is born. And as we're watching these facts, at some moment, at some point, somewhere in the United States, a person dies in real time. And my message to my students when we're talking about this is, you cannot do that on paper. It's a different medium. Why replicate one medium in another medium? The screen environment is not paper. Second example. It's a routine by a stand-up comic. I'll let you read it quickly. So even as text, it made you laugh, because I heard a few giggles here. Let me show you what the video looks like. So did that work for you? Over the years, there's general agreement that the movement and timing of the words enhance the humorous content. People point to how key words moved to illustrate the word's action. Backflip, shish kebab, spin. This was communicated by setting the words in motion. And the idea to show a foosball at the end with a bunch of me's was genius. And the music, lighthearted jazz, fun, it helps set the stage. Again, you can't do that on paper. Let's move to the third piece. This is a more serious subject. It's conveying information about peak oil, which is an environmental issue. In this class, I gave each student a different environmental topic to research and present in 1 minute. In most cases, I purposely give them a time limit because it forces them to edit their message and really get down to the heart of what is important. So here's the text of what the student came up with. And you can be sure that she edited it over and over until it fit the 60-second time frame. And here's the video.
Think for a minute of the world as a giant water balloon. However, instead of water, this balloon is filled with oil. When we first started drilling for oil about 150 years ago, there was so much of it that the pressure alone caused the oil to spurt out of the earth. But as time passes and we poke more and more holes into the balloon, the less pressure the oil is under, and the slower it gushes out. One day in the near future, it will slow to a trickle, and we will have to expend more energy extracting the oil than the energy it contains. This point is known as peak oil. Once this happens, prices will skyrocket, and not just for gasoline, but for everything. Our current way of life depends on not just oil, but cheap oil. We can lessen the blow of this potential economic disaster by decreasing our dependence on oil. Think about using alternative energy sources, or just reducing consumption. Because the question is not how much oil is left, it is how much oil is left until it peaks.
I think that's a pretty impressive 60-second elevator pitch, don't you? What makes this work is the combination of words on screen, images on screen, and words spoken. 3 channels working together, but also independently to convey information. Easier said than done, obviously. So why my interest in moving messages? Here's what I think's going on. We're in the midst, and have been for a while, but we're in the midst of a shift from what I call book culture to digital culture. Let's look at a few traits. The primary format for books is paper. For digital culture, it's screens. Ink on paper is static, doesn't change, whereas screens are dynamic, ever-changing. And the elements one works with in books are basically words and images, but now with digital culture, you've got words, images, movement, and sound. Time for me is the key element here. It's a design element. And time allows words to be sequenced on screen, and time allows for words to move on screen. The first example, you had a sequence. You had a statement, another statement, another statement. They moved in time, but they were basically sequenced. Whereas in the second one, you had actually motion. You had sequence and motion as well. Sequence has meaning. Movement has meaning. Type in sequence and movement produces what I call kinetic typography. I like that term because the root of the word kinetic actually means movement. And for me, kinetic typography is fundamentally about communication, and communication for me is all of these. Most people will understand we communicate by explaining, by visualizing, and so on. But I look to the word performing as a key word here, because in a way, this is a performance, as on stage, a live performance, and the other is touching emotions. More and more, I realize that the messages we want to get across to people need to grab them, and in some ways do so emotionally. I'm going to show you 3 more examples to end this presentation. And I want you to look for the voice that emerges in each of them. It's the student's voice. It's their interpretation of the content. The first one is an introduction to a famous designer. The second one is about autism. And the third one actually has no words in it. But these abstract shapes, for me, are like words. And they move in and through time in what I consider to be a very beautiful choreography. Let's watch them. To close, I want to end with two favorite quotes. This is by L. Lissitzky, who wrote this actually in 1923, sorry for the typo, 90 years ago. And he says, the new book demands new writers. And this was part of a manifesto he wrote about new thinking that he thought was needed for book design. But the more I think about this, the more I've talked to students about this, I realize that anything new needs new thinking. And I think of a lot of man-made constructs that need to change or want to change and need new people engaged in it. I think of governments, I think of corporations, I think of organizations, I think of education. And the other quote is by the Swiss artist Paul Klee. He reminds us that we communicate with human beings and we respond to activities, to messages, to artifacts, not just with the intellect, but with the heart. And in a tip of the hat to the topic of, or the theme of today's events, when words move through time and dance across space, this playing field we call kinetic typography is boundless, boundless. Thank you.